Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the morning report for Sunday, November 30, 2025. Let's get into it. Before we begin, ladies and gentlemen, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And let's get into it.
This message comes from Vital Farms, who works with small American farms to bring you pasture-raised eggs. Click the play button to hear from pasture-raised egg farmer Tanner Pace, who shares the sights and sounds he and his hens experience on the rolling hills of his family farm in southern Missouri. This message comes from Capital One. The Capital One Venture X business card earns unlimited double miles on every purchase. Capital One, what's in your wallet? Terms and conditions apply. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/VentureXBusiness. Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Louise Schiavone. Authorities say a gunman killed 4 people late Saturday afternoon at a family gathering in Stockton, California. Several people were wounded. Police are searching for a suspect in what they believe may have been a targeted incident. San Joaquin County District Attorney Ron Freitas says children were among those in the line of fire.
Children should not be harmed by gun and gang violence.
Police are asking the public for help in tracking down the gunman who opened fire at a family gathering in a banquet hall. As of tomorrow, Monday, millions of people face new work requirements for SNAP food aid. NPR's Jennifer Ludden reports it's part of a major budget cut to the program passed by Republicans in Congress last summer.
Already able-bodied people without dependents can only get SNAP for 3 months over 3 years unless they work, train, or volunteer for 80 hours a month. Now, that requirement will apply to older people, boosting the cutoff age from 54 to 64, and to parents whose children are 14 or older. Unhoused people, veterans, and young adults aging out of foster care will also no longer be exempt. Republicans say the aim is to weed out waste and fraud. Critics say the new rules have been rushed with little time to prepare. They come after weeks of chaos when the Trump administration refused to pay full SNAP benefits during the federal shutdown. Jennifer Ludden, NPR News, Washington.
Pope Leo XIV travels from Turkey to Lebanon today, his first papal visit to the Middle East. As correspondent Jane Araf reports, his visit is sparking hope and some fear among Lebanese. At the seat of the Maronite Catholic Patriarch, workers, mostly Syrian refugees, are building a giant stage. Event organizer Neiman Azzi hopes the visit will shed light on the country.
It's a beautiful message globally to mention that Lebanon is not a place for war. It's not a place of hate.
The Pope's dozen events are all in Beirut or north of the capital. He won't be going to visit Christians in the south, where war between Israel and the militant group Hezbollah raged. Despite a year-old ceasefire, Israel regularly attacks the south and bombed Beirut just last week, killing a senior Hezbollah official. At Our Lady of Lebanon Sanctuary in Harissa, visitors were excited about the Pope's visit, but many Lebanese are afraid Israeli attacks will increase once the Pope leaves. For NPR News, I'm Jane Araf in Harissa, Lebanon. Negotiators for Ukraine are in West Palm Beach, Florida, to talk about a U.S. plan to end the fighting with Russia. They're meeting with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. The president has signaled he will send Witkoff and perhaps Kushner to Moscow this week to meet with Putin about the plan. This is NPR News in Washington. Some states are watching for a Supreme Court ruling on the Voting Rights Act that may prompt a new wave of congressional redistricting. The timing of the court's decision could have a big implication for the gerrymandering fight ahead of next year's midterm elections. NPR's Hansi Lo Wang reports.
It's not clear when the Supreme Court will issue its decision in a closely watched redistricting case out of Louisiana. But after the justices held a rare second hearing for the case in October, some court watchers say the court's conservative majority may soon issue a ruling that weakens the Voting Rights Act's protections against voting districts that dilute the power of racial minorities. That could lead to Republican-led states, particularly in the South, undoing districts where black voters have a realistic opportunity of electing their preferred candidates, who are usually Democrats. But congressional maps for next year's midterms have to be finalized before a state's filing deadline for candidates running in the primary, and those deadlines are coming up in December for Mississippi, in January for Alabama, and in February for Louisiana. Anzila Wong, NPR News.
In Switzerland, voters are considering a referendum to require that women, like men, be called up for national service. This could involve participation in the military, civil protection teams, or other public service. The Swiss parliament opposes the idea, arguing that it could involve costs and poses the likelihood that it would take too many young people out of the workforce. For its part, the government says there's no shortage of military and civil defense staff, and that compulsory female military service could place an extra burden on women with families. I'm Louise Schiavone, NPR News, Washington. Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Louise Schiavone. Venezuela is now responding after President Trump said Saturday that pilots should consider the airspace over and near that country closed. As Julia Carnero reports, Venezuelan officials are calling the Trump statement a colonialist threat against their sovereignty.
Venezuela's foreign ministry called Trump's comments, quote, another extravagant, illegal, and unjustified aggression against the Venezuelan people, and said that it was unilaterally suspending all flights deporting Venezuelan migrants. The Federal Aviation Administration had recently warned airlines of potentially hazardous situation when flying over the country, leading companies to suspend flights and Venezuela to revoke operating rights for 6 major airlines. As the U.S. increases military pressure on the country, President Trump said Thursday that it could begin targeting alleged Venezuelan drug traffickers on land very soon. For NPR News, I'm Julia Carneiro.
The U.S. military, family, and friends last night honored U.S. Army Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, the 20-year-old soldier who died in an ambush while patrolling the streets of Washington, D.C. At a vigil at her former high school in Webster County, West Virginia, school principal Greg Burleson remembered Beckstrom.
She carried herself with quiet strength, a contagious smile, and a positive energy that lifted people around her.
Like Beckstrom, Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf was critically injured, but he is still alive. Suspect Ramanullah Lakhanwal, one of thousands of refugees from Afghanistan, now faces first-degree murder charges. Police say he had driven across country to launch the ambush attack. The Trump administration is halting all asylum decisions as a result of this shooting. And they have paused the visa process for people traveling on Afghan passports and plan to review the status of Afghans already in the United States. In Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney says that he plans to travel to Washington in the coming week and will see President Trump. But as Dan Karpenchuk reports, Carney also cautioned Canadians not to read too much into the visit in connection with any resumption of trade talks.
Those talks were abruptly ended last month by Trump after a TV ad that featured former President Ronald Reagan saying tariffs do not work in the long term. Talks have not restarted, and Carney says he will re-engage on trade issues when Washington is ready. He says he's briefly talked to Trump this week, but offered nothing substantive. Carney will be in Washington for events related to the upcoming FIFA World Cup. Meanwhile, Carney has unveiled a slate of new measures aimed at protecting Canada's steel and lumber industries, which have been struggling under tariffs levied by the Trump administration. For NPR News, I'm Dan Karpenchuk in Toronto.
This is NPR News in Washington. On this heavy holiday travel day, the forecast is for heavy snow in parts of the Midwest. Hundreds of flights out of Chicago have been canceled since yesterday. The Atlantic hurricane season draws to an official close today with 13 named storms and 3 Category 5 hurricanes. It did fulfill forecasts it would be an active season, but as NPR's Greg Allen reports, for the first time in a decade, no hurricane made landfall in the United States.
The season's most destructive hurricane was Melissa, which hit Jamaica with 185-mile-per-hour winds, devastating communities like Black River and St. Elizabeth. As it formed and approached the island, the National Hurricane Center accurately forecast the storm's track and intensity, aided by a new weather model powered by artificial intelligence. Google's DeepMind AI-based model provided meteorologists with their best guidance this season. Wallace Hogsett is a science operation officer with NHC.
I think it's clear at this point that AI will be a component of the hurricane forecast process going forward.
Researchers say AI models will lead to earlier and more accurate hurricane forecasts, vital for protecting vulnerable communities. Greg Allen, NPR News, Miami.
In Hong Kong, authorities say the death toll has risen to 146 in a massive apartment blaze that erupted Wednesday and burned for more than 2 days. Investigators have been combing through 7 blocks of buildings, finding bodies both inside apartments and on the roof. The building contractor for the complex has 28 projects underway, all of which have been suspended by authorities. Company leaders suspected of gross negligence. I'm Louise Schiavone, NPR News.
This message comes from Capital One with the Venture X card. Earn unlimited double miles, a $300 annual Capital One travel credit, and access to airport lounges. Capital One, what's in your wallet? Terms apply. Details at CapitalOne.com.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Louise Schiavone. In Stockton, California, late yesterday, a family gathering in a banquet hall was interrupted by a gunman firing on the group. 4 people have died, others have been injured. Children are among the victims. Heather Brent of the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office is asking for people with information to come forward.
The victims have been transported to local hospitals throughout the area. This is a very active and ongoing investigation. Information remains very limited at this time. Early indications suggest that this may be a targeted incident.
Several of the victims were transported to hospitals. Hondurans will head to the polls today to elect a new president, and President Trump is getting involved. NPR's Ada Peralta has details.
In a post on Truth Social, President Trump endorsed conservative Tito Asfura for president, and he also said he would issue a pardon to former President Juan Orlando Hernandez. Hernandez was convicted of drug trafficking in a federal court in the United States, and he was also implicated in huge corruption scandals at home. Asfura took the National Party reins from Hernandez, and he lost to a leftist candidate in 2021. In his post, Trump threatened to pull USA to Honduras if Asfura doesn't win. The most recent polls show 3 candidates are in a dead heat for the presidency. Ada Peralta, NPR News, Mexico City.
Northwestern University has agreed to pay tens of millions of dollars to the federal government. This would restore hundreds of millions in research funding withheld by the Trump administration. The initial loss contributed to the resignation of the school's president. NPR's Alyssa Nadworny reports.
Part of the deal would require Northwestern University, an elite school outside Chicago, to pay the government $75 million over the next 3 years. In exchange, the government will unfreeze $790 million in research funding that was canceled last spring over accusations of racial discrimination and anti-Semitism. The agreement allows the college to retain full academic freedom and says the Trump administration will end all open investigations into the school. This deal follows similar deals the Trump administration has made with Cornell University, Brown University, and Columbia University. Alyssa Nadworny, NPR News.
Negotiators for Ukraine are in West Palm Beach, Florida, to talk about a U.S. plan to end the fighting with Russia. They're meeting with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. The president has signaled he'll send Witkoff and perhaps Kushner to Moscow this week for talks with Russia. In his first official visit as pontiff, Pope Leo XIV is in the Middle East, currently on his way to Lebanon. Early in his travels, Leo prayed with Armenians at their apostolic cathedral, with the visit seen as helpful in addressing long-standing tensions between Turkey and Armenians. This is NPR News in Washington. Indonesian authorities say a week of monsoon rains has left 316 people dead and thousands displaced on the island of Sumatra. In Sri Lanka, the death toll from floods and mudslides has risen to 193. With more than 100,000 people displaced, conditions have made the delivery of aid very difficult. The draw for the 2026 World Cup will take place this week at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. NPR's Franco Ordonez reports President Trump might be in the stands for the games.
President Trump boasted of an economic boom for the country as more than 1 million visitors are expected to attend the world's biggest sporting event, co-hosted by the U.S., Canada, and Mexico.
The world is watching, and it really is. It's like having, many Super Bowls, actually. Each game is almost a Super Bowl. Some of them are, I guess you could say, bigger than Super Bowls. I guess when you get to the finals, it's of that level or more. Much more. Worldwide.
48 national teams will be featured. The draw event will determine the different World Cup groups and games each team plays in the opening round. Trump announced that the U.S. will also expedite visas for foreign visitors with tickets to matches in the different 11 U.S. cities. Franco Ordonez, NPR News.
On this big holiday travel Sunday, the forecast is for heavy snow in parts of the Midwest. Hundreds of flights out of Chicago have been canceled. A chilly Sunday is in store for New England and the Mid-Atlantic states, with mainly rain in the forecast. Snow is in the mountain forecast in parts of the West. I'm Louise Schiavone, NPR News, Washington.
This message comes from Mint Mobile. Starting at $15 a month, make the switch at mintmobile.com/switch. $45 upfront payment for 3 months. 5 gigabyte plan equivalent to $15 a month. Taxes and fees extra. First 3 months only. See terms.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Louise Schiavone. A Delta jet slid off a runway in Des Moines, Iowa last night. No major injuries were reported, but officials closed the city's airport temporarily. NPR's Matt Bloom reports the accident comes as a major winter storm disrupts travel throughout the Midwest.
The airline says the flight from Detroit, Michigan left the runway's paved surface while transitioning to the taxiway after landing. All 54 passengers and 4 crew members were evacuated and taken to the terminal via bus. The slide happened after a powerful winter storm dropped more than 8 inches of snow in parts of Iowa and other states across the Midwest. The storm hit just as many residents head home from the Thanksgiving holiday, and officials say more delays are likely. Forecasters say another winter storm could bring freezing rain and ice in the Appalachians Monday and Tuesday, and moderate to heavy snow in the interior Northeast. Matt Bloom, NPR News.
Flight delays out of Chicago persist this morning as snow-covered roads are creating challenging driving conditions. The death toll from a fire at a high-rise housing complex in Hong Kong has risen to 146. The whereabouts of about 150 others is unclear. Officials say the search through the buildings could take up to 3 weeks. The BBC's Martin Yip has more from Hong Kong.
We are hearing this new death toll of 146, and that's the result of the police victim identifications team. The experts have been going through 2 other buildings today and found these new victims sadly died in this raging fire that started on Wednesday. We've heard from local media that the queue just coming into this park to pay respect to those who've died in this fire is now 2 kilometers long, with people not just laying flowers but writing down messages of condolences.
The BBC's Martin Yip reporting from Hong Kong. The Supreme Court is still mulling whether to take up the question of birthright citizenship this term. As NPR's Martin Costi reports, President Trump wants the High Court to back his executive order signed in January, limiting the right.
For more than a century, courts have read the 14th Amendment to mean any child born on U.S. soil is an American citizen. But the Trump administration says that reading is too broad. It says the right should be reserved for people who are, in the words of the amendment, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Trump signed an order in January withholding citizenship from children born to parents who are in the country illegally or on temporary visas. So far, federal judges have blocked that order, which is why the White House now wants the Supreme Court to weigh in. The justices are expected to meet privately on December 5th and discuss whether to take this case this term. They're not obliged to, but if they do, a ruling on birthright citizenship could come by June. Martin Costi, NPR News.
This is NPR. West Virginia Governor Patrick Morrisey saluted 20-year-old Sarah Beckstrom at a vigil service last night, honoring the brief but heroic service of the U.S. Army specialist gunned down Wednesday while on patrol in Washington, D.C.
Bound by grief, but to honor the life, the courage, and the spirit of Sarah Beckstrom.
Beckstrom was a West Virginian. Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf was on patrol with her. He was critically injured, but he is still alive. The accused shooter is a refugee from Afghanistan. Pope Leo travels to Lebanon today, where he meets with leaders in a country that continues to be targeted by Israeli airstrikes. NPR's Ruth Sherlock reports.
This is the most diplomatically thorny part of Pope Leo's trip. He steps into a heated and complex political environment where lots of competing groups have their own hopes and expectations for this papal visit. For example, Hezbollah, the Lebanese militia, has called upon the Pope to express his, quote, rejection to the injustice and aggression of continued Israeli airstrikes against the group despite a ceasefire. And some Lebanese hope Pope Leo can hold Lebanon's political class to account for the vast corruption in the country and over the explosion in 2020 when large stores of ammonium nitrate triggered a blast that devastated the capital, Beirut. Ruth Sherlock, NPR News, on the papal plane to Lebanon.
Pope Francis had hoped to visit Lebanon, but his failing health would not allow it. I'm Louise Schiavone, NPR News, Washington.
This message comes from Mint Mobile. Starting at $15 a month, make the switch at mintmobile.com/switch. $45 upfront payment for 3 months. 5 gigabyte plan equivalent to $15 a month. Taxes and fees extra. First 3 months only. See terms. Comes from Mint Mobile. Starting at $15 a month, make the switch at mintmobile.com/switch. $45 upfront payment for 3 months. 5 gigabyte plan equivalent to $15 a month. Taxes and fees extra. First 3 months only. See terms.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Louise Schiavone. Additional National Guardsmen are due to join those already patrolling Washington, D.C. NPR's Deepa Shivaram explains.
The president announced he was going to add 500 more National Guard troops, like you said, to D.C. This happened shortly after the attack on Guard members earlier this week. That plan appears to remain in place. Those 500 new Guard members will join about the 2,000 Guard members who are already in the city. And there is a new development, though, from the weekend, which is that the government has also declared that every group of National Guard members patrolling Washington, D.C. will also be accompanied by at least one D.C. police officer.
NPR's Deepa Shivaram reporting Venezuela is now responding after President Trump declared that pilots should consider the airspace over and near that country closed. As Julia Carnero reports, Venezuelan officials say the statement is a colonialist threat to their sovereignty.
Venezuela's foreign ministry called Trump's comments, quote, another extravagant, illegal, and unjustified aggression against the Venezuelan people, and said that it was unilaterally suspending all flights deporting Venezuelan migrants. The Federal Aviation Administration had recently warned airlines of potentially hazardous situation when flying over the country, leading companies to suspend flights and Venezuela to revoke operating rights for 6 major airlines. As the U.S. increases military pressure on the country, President Trump said Thursday that it could begin targeting alleged Venezuelan drug traffickers on land very soon. For NPR News, I'm Julia Carneiro.
More federal spending decisions await Congress as members return from their holiday break. NPR's Deirdre Walsh reports that they face a January 30th deadline to avoid another shutdown, and that is going to involve some intense debate.
The deal ending the historic 43-day government shutdown extended current spending levels at most federal agencies through January 30th. Lawmakers on the appropriations committees in the House and Senate are working to bundle some of the annual bills together. If both chambers fail to agree on legislation, Congress could again end up passing a continuing resolution that could extend the same funding levels for a full fiscal year. The inability by lawmakers on Capitol Hill to approve detailed budgets for federal agencies has ceded more power to the executive branch. Deirdre Walsh, NPR News, the Capitol.
Authorities say a gunman killed 4 people, wounding others late Saturday afternoon at a family gathering in Stockton, California. Police are searching for a suspect in what they believe may have been a targeted incident. San Joaquin County District Attorney Ron Freitas says that children were among those in the line of fire.
Children should not be harmed by gun and gang violence.
Police are asking the public for help. This is NPR News in Washington. Ski resorts out west are a bit anxious due to lower than usual snowfall. NPR's Kirk Sigler reports some are also bracing for a continued drop in Canadian visitors due to cross-border politics.
Whitefish Mountain Resort is about 60 miles from the Montana-British Columbia border, and historically upwards of a quarter of its guests have been Canadian. Canadian crossings at the border have dropped precipitously since President Trump levied tariffs and said Canada should become the 51st state. Resort spokesman Chad Sokol says it hasn't had a huge effect locally yet.
Last season, I think it was early March when the tariffs hit right after President's Weekend, so our busy periods were already behind us at that point.
Ski resorts aren't sure what to expect going into this season, but many, like Whitefish, have seen a spike in domestic travel lately, which is offsetting the drop in international visitors. Kirk Sigler, NPR News, Whitefish, Montana.
Indonesia says the death toll from this week's flooding on the western island of Sumatra has reached 435. Michael Sullivan has details.
November's been a bad month weather-wise for Southeast Asia, with typhoons and tropical storms battering the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia, leaving nearly 1,000 people dead. Relief teams in Indonesia are using helicopters and fixed-winged aircraft to reach areas hard hit by this week's storm. Many areas remain inaccessible by vehicles due to downed bridges and damaged roads. Another storm is moving into the region this week.
Michael Sullivan reporting. I'm Louise Schiavone, NPR News, Washington.
This message comes from Mint Mobile. Starting at $15 a month, make the switch at mintmobile.com/switch. $45 upfront payment for 3 months. 5 gigabyte plan equivalent to $15 a month. Taxes and fees extra. First 3 months only. See terms.
Ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, that is going to do it for this morning's first legal breaking reporting video analysis update reporting for the morning of November 30, 2025. See you in about an hour or so for our second legal breaking reporting video analysis update for the morning of Sunday, November 30, 2025. If you did enjoy this legal breaking reporting, please make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, and enjoy for more legal breaking news that you need to know about. More to come soon.